Hello there, and welcome to Speaking of Our Words, programming that brings you the wide range of voices, stories, and forms of local writers, and offering you some insight into their creative process. My name is Chris DeGuire. I teach creative writing workshops at Columbia College Chicago, and I will be your host. We have several guests today, all open mic readers today, so why don't we get going? Our first piece is going to be by regular contributor Richard Bell, who cannot be with us in the studio here today. So standing in for him is going to be Lisa Adamowicz Kless. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, how are you?
All right, Lisa, so you've got Rich's story. Whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right, this is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Sure, there are a lot of Christmas stories about Santa, but I've always wondered about the reindeer. For instance, where did Rudolph get his red nose from? So I did a little research and discovered the following theories. Some claim that when he was young, Rudolph was helping to put up the Christmas lights at the North Pole, and he slipped and fell off the ladder head first into a box of multicolored light bulbs, and a really big red one got jammed up his nose. The reason it glows is because of some reaction with all the radiation at the North Pole that comes from the sun and is concentrated due to some weird magnetic field that only a few people understand. Santa and the surgeons tried to remove the red bulb from his nose, but discovered it went in very deep, and taking it out would risk permanent brain damage. Another theory is that his mother drank and smoked a lot before he was born, which caused a strange mutation. So Rudolph is really a mutant, and would qualify for the X-Men if there were animal X-Men. Rudolph can control the brightness and see in the dark by infrared light, and can also make it bright enough to blind you if he wanted to. It makes him kind of dangerous, I think. There's another theory which simply states that one day he accidentally stepped on a live wire and got jolted with a few thousand volts of electricity, which fried his nose and crystallized the blood vessels, causing it to turn red. It only gets bright when he is angry, so to guide Santa's sleigh, the elves and the other reindeer have to make him really mad. That would explain why just before Christmas, they laugh and call him names and don't let him join in any reindeer games, which we learn from the song. Now, it's not so mysterious, is it? They have a good reason, and he gets so mad that Santa has to intervene at the last minute, so there's enough glow left to guide the sleigh. But just in time before Rudolph murders all the other reindeer while they're asleep. The elves put Rudolph on a suicide watch at the same time. Finally, there's a theory that during the off-season, Rudolph and his family lived at Chernobyl in Russia, where they had that terrible nuclear accident. But that would not explain why his nose was red beforehand, so we can rule that out. We can also be glad that he is not referred to as Rudolph the Brown-Nosed Reindeer, which would be more of a social commentary. There is no indication that his nose was ever any other color than red. Then again, maybe his nose is red because he's been a communist all this time. Merry Christmas, comrade!
Lisa Adamowicz Kless, thank you very much. Richard Bell, thank you very much for that piece. All right, our next reader is going to be Irene Bilak. Hello, Irene.
Hello. Hello.
Irene, what do you have for us today?
I have a couple of pieces today. I have a summary of my novel that I'm attempting to write, and perhaps this will make it clearer for me as to what I have to do. And then, because there's still unrest in Ukraine, war, I would like to repeat a poem that I wrote called Lament.
Sure, very good. Irene Bilak, take it away.
My novel is called Nadia. Nadia is left in Hungary for safekeeping by her parents and her two brothers during their flight from Ukraine to the West during the Second World War. Her family flees to Austria by train. She is well taken care of by Anton and Claudia Rosan, is educated, and marries Michael, a Ukrainian man. Together they try to escape to Austria. They are captured and arrested. Michael is sent to Kazakhstan for hard labor, Nadia to Lviv, Ukraine, where she is held for many years and tortured as a spy. Upon amnesty, Michael settles in Kazakhstan, marries Zahara, and has two sons. He does not know the whereabouts of Nadia because of the closed societies, the Iron Curtain, in Kazakhstan and Ukraine under the Soviet Union. Nadia has no knowledge of Michael, and after being set free, is helped by a nun. She works for St. George Cathedral in Lviv, helping orphans. Here she meets a writer from Kyiv. They marry and have one son, Alexander. Nadia writes for Ukrainian journals and helps her husband with literary works criticizing the Soviet government. She is also active in many organizations which promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Through her colleagues and husband, she gains support and becomes politically active. During Glasnost, Perestroika, she is involved clandestinely with Western supporters, especially Ukrainian American citizens in the diaspora. Her brother, who is in the CIA, is able to find her before she becomes president and unites her with her family, whom she has not seen for many years. Running for president of Ukraine, after having won a seat in the parliament several times, Nadia receives support from the West. Corruption, drug, and sex trafficking are rampant in Ukraine. The Ukrainian consul to Kazakhstan is directly involved in the sex trade. Zahara, now his wife, who has left Michael in Kazakhstan, is the whistleblower revealing this information to the candidate. Nadia is successful in eradicating some of these vices. She also is successful in getting many votes against her opponent, Fedorenko, who is involved in many corruption schemes, especially the sex trade. Fedorenko, through his spies, knows that Nadia is working against him. Revenge and jealousy torment him. His henchmen kill Nadia's parents when they visit Nadia in Kyiv. Though she is horrified and crushed by the murders of her parents, after the funeral, Nadia returns to Ukraine to make speeches and continues her candidacy for president. Her motherland party supports her wholeheartedly. Her first husband, Michael, has deteriorated into alcoholism after his wife Zahara left him to marry the Ukrainian consul general to Kazakhstan. He decides to travel to Kyiv and find Zahara. Seeing her on the stage singing for Nadia during one of her public appearances in front of a great throng of supporters, he aims his gun and tries to shoot Zahara. He misses because he's outrageously drunk, ill, and weak. Instead of Zahara, he mistakenly kills Nadia, the president of Ukraine, and once his beloved first wife. Alexander, Nadia's son, is left to pick up the pieces. He is an ardent Ukrainian patriot and a hero of the Maidan Revolution who wants to carry on his mother's work. And this is the poem Lament. I'm just one person, but I care, I love. It is my birthplace, the land of my ancestors. The people stood with dignity and pride. They cried, "This land is ours." Corrupt ruler they overthrew, and I am proud. But then the evil showed its horns once more. Trucks armored and men in green rolled into Crimea grand, a land of golden sun and sea so black, on beaches white, historic sites too close to homeland, to the heart. Why must this little man, bare-chested for the public, Olympics showing off, intrude upon proud people of Ukraine, taking their land, taking their pride? O Holy Spirit, deities of all believers, cherubim and seraphim, Holy Virgin, goddesses and priests, saints revered and holy monks, I kneel to you in supplication. Deliver Ukraine from Putin's wrath, from his strong hand, from his dominion. Save the country wanting to breathe free, borders intact, to live in peace with all the world, to be part of something great in freedom without fear, as equal partner in this wondrous journey of human rights, the rule of law, justice for all, integrity, respect and dignity, education, and economic prosperity. I beseech you, God, Allah, Buddha, and Yahweh, please hear my prayer, my humble plea. Deliver the people of Ukraine from evil and from war. Grant peace to all the countries of the world. Amen.
Very on point, Irene. Thank you very much. That was Irene Baylock, and you are listening to Speaking of Our Words. Next up is Darleen Coleman. Hello, Darleen.
Hi, Chris.
Darleen, what do you have for us today?
I have one of my older stories written about an older couple, Howard and Renee.
All right, very good. Darleen Coleman, take it away.
My husband Howard's job as a euthanasia technician for County Animal Control is about to end, and I am stumped as to a theme for his retirement party. I see themes in everything. Maybe that's why the shelter manager asked me to be in charge of Howard's party. Being a preschool teacher, I've always decorated for every holiday you can name, and then for some I've made up. Howard will be putting his last animals to sleep in the sweltering dog days of August, but that theme leaves me cold. It's been hard for me to understand how such a sensitive man could inject people's throwaway pets each day with a solution of Fatal Plus and retain such a positive attitude. Howard always told me, "Renee, if you were sentenced to die, who would you want to be your executioner? Someone who would just slam a needle in your arm, or someone who would give you a cookie and rub your neck?" Howard's hobby is growing roses, so I suppose I could develop a theme around that. I guess I could write on the cake, "It's time to smell the roses, Howard," but that might make me feel guilty later on. My secret plan is to move us out of this boring neighborhood. I have been dropping hints since New Year's Eve. "Howard," I said on Groundhog Day, "doesn't this neighborhood kind of look like a Lego village to you?" "What are you talking about, Renee?" His mouth moved, but I could tell by his glazed eyes that he wasn't really sitting in his lazy boy with a burpee catalog. He was squatting in his garden, pushing back last year's mulch and making plans of his own. "Well," I began, "all the houses around here are yellow brick, and all the front lawns have the same yews in the same places, and all the trees are maples. Looks plastic." I caught Howard's eyes dart from the catalog back to me as I said, "Everybody's old here." "Pumpkin, we aren't exactly youngsters," Howard smiled, got up, and rubbed my neck. "I want to be around young people, college students maybe, with Thai restaurants and bookstores down the street, a place to hang my wind chimes without the neighbors complaining." I was mad at myself for letting it gush out when I'd planned on whispering things in his ear as he drifted off at night. All Howard said, though, was that he'd take me out to dinner more often. Last night I dreamt a realty agent came over and made little crayon marks on our walls next to all the light switches. I knew she left them as clues for Howard. Next, I was in the True Value buying weed killer. I mixed some with Howard's Miracle Grow and threw away the empty container in a neighbor's garbage bin. Then I took a train to some college town and walked into a brightly lit gallery. At first, the paintings on the walls were the same ones I did in art class back in Iowa a million years ago, but then they turned into the faces of my kids at Tiny Tot World. When I came out of the gallery, the street was covered with mud, and I couldn't remember which way was home. A red dog, big as a car, came by, and I climbed onto his back. I told him I had to get back before Howard fed the roses. In a voice like Mr. Rogers, the dog said, "It's a beautiful day in your neighborhood, Renee." I woke up in a cold sweat, my legs twisted in the sheets. Howard woke up too. I told him I'd had a hot flash. He rubbed my back, and I drifted off again. Snapshots of Howard and me in Dubuque, playing like a movie on the back of my eyelids. Before he left for work this morning, Howard wrapped his arms around me. His worn denim shirt felt soft as flannel. "Renee," he said, "I really think you could use a change of scenery. How about we take a little trip to Dubuque? We could see Ted and Helen. Haven't seen them in ages. What do you say? You've got vacation time, and come August 31st, I'm a free man, Pumpkin." The next day at Tiny Tot World, a little Asian boy in the threes room missed his bus. His teacher had already left, so I sat with him, wiping his tears. He wouldn't say anything at all, and he had wet his pants. His shiny black hair was much too big for his face. He had tiny, delicate hands, and gripped tightly in one was a green plastic soldier. We waited 5 minutes. When nobody came, I walked him around his room, looking for the cubby where his extra clothes would be stashed. I scanned the big block-printed names above each cubby. He didn't seem to know which was his. I had just about made up my mind to take him home when his mother rang the bell. She didn't speak English, but she smiled a lot and looked relieved. Maybe instead of moving, we could adopt a child. I called Howard at work as soon as I got home. Honey, do you think it's too late to adopt? Or we could be foster parents. We could be foster grandparents. You feeling okay, Renee? It was just an idea, Howard. Sometimes I'm too impulsive. Howard is more the pondering type. He always knows what he's going to do before he does it. At work, he plays with the dogs first. He wants them to know someone cared. The cats he does right away because he says they always know. But he pets them and talks softly until they die. The people Howard works with are like that, but most of them are women all much younger than Howard and me. I stopped going to their get-togethers because I always ended up feeling like a gourd in a field of peaches. Howard came home prepared for me to be unraveled. I think it caught him off guard to find me in the bathroom touching up my roots. You think I ought to start drawing again, I said, peeling off my red-stained rubber gloves. I think you ought to do whatever makes you happy. You've always been an artist at heart anyway. I examined my hair under the fluorescent light of the mirror. You think we should have adopted after I lost the third one, don't you? We did what seemed right for us at the time. Let's not pick that scab now. Howard looked tired and bewildered in a way that reminded me of that little lost boy today. I remembered us in Dubuque. We thought life was a destination and that our road map was infallible. You can use up a lot of energy on dreams that never happen. How sad when you reach the point where looking back is more fun than looking forward. I sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing lotion on my legs. You don't think we took the wrong road? I said, rubbing some lotion on Howard's back. I figure we took a detour, honey, and we ended up on a different road is all. Howard always did make me feel better. A couple of days later, Howard came home carrying a big cardboard box. I think this little guy might be just what we need, Howard said, scooping up a handful of fuzzy black fur. He must have noticed the puzzled look on my face. I know I've still got a week left to work, but when I spotted him, I couldn't wait. In all the years that he had worked at county, Howard had never brought home an animal. He told me years ago that if he took one home, he'd want to take them all. I've always felt sorry for him having to hold in his feelings all these years. I can't believe I'm really leaving there, can you? He likes riding in the car. He can go with us to Dubuque. The puppy yipped and ran circles on the kitchen floor. Howard's eyes shone like a child's, as if they hadn't seen anything ugly in the world yet. How about it, Pumpkin? A little going-away present for me? He grinned. It was beginning to sink in now. Howard was retiring. Our lives were about to veer off course, and I had misplaced the map. I started to wonder just who wanted things to change around here. Howard reached down and picked up the dog, extracting a construction paper flower from its mouth. I'm sorry, Renee, I think he's torn up your project. That's okay, I said, picking up the rest of the torn paper. I can always come up with a new theme. I stood next to Howard as he petted the pup. What are we going to call him? I have a feeling, said Howard, that we'll work out all the details. He took the puppy out to the backyard. It never did take much to make Howard happy. Tomorrow's the retirement party. I figured I'd lighten up my hair a bit. Now as I sit here dripping hair dye, waiting for the timer, I wonder if Howard will notice the difference between Beaujolais blush and cinnamon surprise. Mostly I wonder why even the simple things we do to maintain our lives are so messy and undignified. I feel like there's a snag in my favorite sweater. No matter how much I want it patched up and made right again, part of me wants to keep on pulling the thread.
Darleen, that was great. Darleen Coleman, you are listening to Speaking of Our Words. And next up is going to be Marguerite McClelland. Hello, Marguerite.
Hi, Chris.
Marguerite, what do you have for us today?
I have 4 poems, all of them about the dark, because we're about to enter the darkest part of the year. And I'm somewhat toward the darkest part of my life. But these poems were all written when I was much, much younger. The first one is called First Fall. Let me sink into this fall day, as though inviting death to come into my door, on hinges I control. It is warm here, away from the early chill, which reminds there is a closing. No fires yet protest against the cold. The sun still plays behind green leaves, a little lower now, a little more distant. It seems safe here. For now the body savors the willful illusion. This body knows only spring. This mind contrives a game with her dark guest and thinks to win. It seems safe here, almost. The next poem is called Saturn. I have frequented your haunts even when I was young. I took off on my own, leaving behind me the laughing unreality of careless friends. I have always sought out your deep labyrinths, feeling them somehow more home than the sun-cradle of beaches. I have flirted with your darkness, invited you into my young days. Come willingly into your fold, and you have released me again to mornings. Perhaps you do not want me anymore. Perhaps I've chalked up days enough in your dark world. Or must I obey too, and bow and bend to your unforgiving end? This one is called Growing Old, and there's a little takeoff on a famous poet, T.S. Eliot. I grow old, I grow old. Shall I wear the bottom of my trousers rolled? Or shall I tell the truth instead, for all my friends who would approve or disapprove are dead? Cantankerous, they say I am, in such a brittle state, a tattered coat upon a stick, and yet I feel not half as sick as in my days of 28, when wineful I was courting all the scarecrows that the earth could hold, or they were courting me. But now, by God, I'm free of fear of loss of luxury, and love of popularity, and hope of fame, and rue of shame, and free, if lame a bit, to tamely rest upon these brittle bones, not half as sharp as velvet in the office, or satin on the bed at home. The last one's called Autumn. It's autumn, most abundant, sturdiest, and full of power, and if not touched by early frost, its days perhaps equally long, and strong, and beautiful, more beautiful than pale and dizzy spectacles of spring, and kind, kinder than hot, oppressive summer afternoons, and happier than all of these, though holding in itself, I know, but so does May, the germ of its demise. We watch the weatherman with keener interest now, hoping for yet a while before first frost, or that first frost just lightly graze, followed by Indian summer days, uncounted and uncountable, leaving geraniums and chrysanthemums erect, ever so conscious of their luck, briefly invincible.
Oh, those are beautiful. Thank you very much, Marguerite McClelland. All right, our next reader is going to be Walter Gascoigne. Hello, Walter.
Oh, hi, Chris.
Walter, what do you have for us today?
Another little upbeat short story.
All right, Walter Gascoigne, take it away.
It's called Permanent Vacation. He had not been this happy in a very long time. In fact, he couldn't remember if he was ever this happy before. He whistled as he went through his house. gathering items he would take with him on his vacation, and he knew that he would need some music for the trip. So he downloaded a copy of The Wall by Pink Floyd to his MP3 player. And just in case it took longer, he decided to download The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. He had no idea how long it would take to make the journey, but he hoped it would not take that long. It really wouldn't matter anyway. He was just happy to be going. He grabbed a 12-pack of beer from the fridge and rolled 2 joints from a stash he had been saving for a special occasion. He looked through his cupboards and decided he might as well take what was left of the bottle of Jack Daniels, too. He might feel like a few shots after a few beers. He had put in his 2-week notice at his job where he worked as a janitor. His supervisor tried to talk him out of it and even offered him $1 more an hour if he would stay. Why hadn't that asshole offered that before he decided to leave? Too late now. His mind was made up. His boss could take this job and shove it up his ass. He cleaned out his locker on his last day and said goodbye to the guys he had worked with for more than 20 years. They all laughed and made jokes on his last lunch hour there. They even chipped in and bought him a towel that had the words from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy printed on it. Don't panic, it told him. Good advice, he thought. He walked out of the building at closing time with a huge grin on his face, blissfully aware that he would never return there again. Why hadn't he done this sooner? All his friends noticed the change in him. He was generally ill-tempered, sulky, and withdrawn, but recently he had become cheerful, optimistic, and content. The transformation in him was astounding. It was as if he was a completely different person. He even felt healthier. For the first time in his life that he could remember, his back didn't hurt, his knee wasn't bothering him, and his head wasn't a jumble of thoughts and emotions that it ordinarily was. He even gave up smoking. His friends would comment on his new demeanor, and he would tell them that it was a long time coming, but he had made up his mind to finally get out of town, and it seemed to him that by making that decision, a huge dark cloud had been removed from his thoughts. He was the happiest he had ever been. He met his daughter at the local restaurant that served her favorite ice cream, and he told her about quitting his job and going on an extended vacation. She saw the look in his eyes. She could tell he was somehow different. Then she realized what it was. He looked contented. He always looked so uptight, like he was screaming on the inside, ready to pull out his own hair. Not today. Today he was smiling, a gleam in his eye, his discourse light and pleasant. She was pleased in the change. She wished he would be like this all the time from now on. They made light-hearted conversation until the bill came. He looked her in the eyes and took her hands in his. I love you, he said. I'll miss you while I'm away, but I will never be far from you. If you ever need me, I'll be there for you. He gave her a kiss on the cheek. This was definitely improvement on her father's demeanor. It made her love him even more. She hugged him, thanked him for lunch and for being such a wonderful dad. He was smiling from ear to ear when he left, but a solitary tear rolled down his cheek as he walked through the door. Before he left, he cleaned the entire house. He washed all the dishes. He straightened out the cupboards, even throwing away the extra Tupperware lids that seemed to number in the hundreds, but where the magic containers were, he could not say. He did the laundry, folded all his clothes, and organized his closet. From his refrigerator, he threw away any food that would spoil and took the garbage to the curb. For the first time in 5 years, he made his bed with fresh sheets and pillowcases. The whole time he went about his chores, he had a smile on his face. He felt light on his feet. It was as if a heavy burden had been taken from his shoulders. He couldn't wait to start his vacation. The last thing he did before he left was call his mother. He had not talked to her in years. He half expected her to hang up on him. The last time they talked, harsh words had been exchanged, and they had not spoken since. His mother was as stubborn and sullen as he was. It was obvious where he got his mannerisms from. She picked up on the 4th ring, but before she could hang up on him, he told her how sorry he was. She grunted. It was her way of saying she was sorry, too. They chatted for 20 minutes, and he told her about his upcoming vacation and how excited he was to finally get away. His mother was her usual self. She thought he was stupid for quitting a job he had worked at for so long. She also told him how dumb an idea of taking a vacation was. She was always concerned over money. It was one of the reasons they had fought the last time they talked. He took the whole conversation in stride. Nothing she could say would make him feel down now. When they were done talking, more like listening for him, she did most of the talking. He told her he loved her and hung up the phone. He was still smiling. He turned off all the lights, lowered the thermostat, and made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Then he headed out to the garage to begin his getaway. Everything was right with the world. He was the happiest man on the planet. He took the end of the hose that was attached to the exhaust of his car and put it through the open passenger window. He got in the driver's side, shut the door, and turned the key in the ignition. He put on his headphones and cranked up the first side of the wall. He lit up a joint and cracked open a beer. He took a swig of whiskey. It burned as it went down, but made him warm on the inside. He smiled, closed his eyes, and laid his head back against the headrest.
Always engaging, Walter. Walter Gascoigne, you are listening to Speaking of Our Words. And next up is going to be Jim Janus. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Chris.
Jim, what do you have for us today?
I have a chapter in an unfinished story, and I wrote this in early 2008 when I was part of a creative writing class. And this was generated through a physical prompt that I was given by the instructor.
Mm-hmm. All right, very good. Jim Janus, take it away.
And this is untitled. The mice huddled together in the dark, cramped space. Their gray bodies were intermittently illuminated from above by thin planes of light slicing downward from the floorboards of a brightly lit laboratory. Up there, two scientists in long white coats worked feverishly around the clock. They both actually had fevers. The plague had been upon the town for years, and it had infected everyone. One scientist bent over a microscope, his open eye almost touching the eyepiece, and his thumb and forefinger on a dial, focusing on the squirming bacteria. The other scientist looked with seriousness at a PC screen, his eyes moving from left to right as he read and interpreted lines of data which described samplings of mouse droppings and the type and level of bacteria the droppings contained. The digital clock, red blocked digits on a black rectangular background, counted backwards, 3 hours and 28 minutes until the lab would be shut down by the quarantine that the government mandated. Just as the clock let go another minute, the scientist at the PC excitedly jumped up and exclaimed, "We found it! It's mouse 132, GenMod 612. The first scientist looked up from the microscope and walked quickly into the adjoining room. It had been a library, but it no longer smelled of aging book bindings and leaves, but instead smelled of the must of rodents. The shelves no longer held books, but instead held thousands of small rectangular metal boxes with air holes, and each metal box contained a single mouse that had been genetically treated in a unique way. The scientist rounded the stacks and stopped at the box marked 132/612. He gently slid the metal box toward himself and off the shelf, and he carried it hurriedly back to the lab. The second scientist had cleared a table, brightly illuminated by a single lamp hanging directly overhead. The first scientist placed the box on the table and slowly slid the metal cover back off the top of the box, and both looked down at the healthy mouse as it moved around the small area, nose and whiskers twitching with curiosity. The scientist noticed three things immediately. First, the mouse, which had been gray like the thousands of other mice, now had gold fur, somewhat like the fur of a chipmunk. Second, the mouse had begun to gnaw through one of the air holes of the box, but had not gotten the hole large enough to escape. And third, there was a single mouse dropping in the box, but it was unlike any dropping they had studied before. This dropping was larger than a usual dropping, and it appeared to be gold. Not just gold in color, but metallic. The first scientist, using tweezers, removed the dropping and placed it into an empty test tube, and then hurriedly brought it to an oven-sized machine which had many dials and gauges and colorful light-emitting diodes. The scientist placed the dropping inside and, pressing a large green button, started the machine. In 30 seconds, a small piece of paper, like an ATM receipt, appeared on the right side of the machine. The scientist detached the small printout and looked at the text that the machine had printed on the small piece of paper. It specified the chemical composition, weight, and density of the dropping. The scientist quickly understood and stated, "Pyrite." The laboratory was granted a stay by the government, and the two scientists spent the next 3 months repeating the genetic modification performed on mouse 132 on thousands of other mice. The treated mice were then moved to breeding pens. After 2 months of starting a population of golden mice, the scientists released them into the wild. The years of plague and the chaos that accompanied it had forced many people into the woods surrounding the city. And after so long of a time in the wild, the people became quite primitive. Many of them were dying of exposure and starvation, and a few were able to create the small fires needed for light, heat, and cooking. As the golden mice moved into and through the wooded surroundings of the city, they left in their paths golden droppings. At first, no one could notice them because the droppings were so small and the forest was so vast. But eventually, more and more droppings were present, and as the people foraged for food, they began to find the small, hard, jagged nuggets that shined gold in the light. One of the people, she had been a geologist before the plague, recognized the pyrite and collected as many of the nuggets as she could find into a tattered sack. She then took the sack to a workshed in the woods, in which there was a variety of tools and a workbench. She struck the pyrite with a hammer, and as she expected, golden sparks arced in all directions, like a very small firework. The geologist then set up an appointment with the spiritual leader of her woods group. The spiritual leader had been a human resources director at the main corporation in town, and in his spare time was a deacon at the town church. "Deacon, these pyrite nuggets are what we need to make fire. Simply hitting one with a hammer creates enough sparks to start a fire with dry leaves or even some very brittle kindling." "Does anyone else know about this?" he asked. "No, I came to you first." "Good. Because a discovery like this could cause another sort of chaos, if not handled in an organized way."
Jim, that was great. Jim Janus, you are listening to Speaking of Our Words. And the last reader will be me. I'm going to read an instance from the worst summer job novel that I've been working on off and on for like 20 years. What you need to know is the main character, Jason, is 17. He's working as a bagger in a grocery store. It is Wednesday night before Thanksgiving in 1999. By 9 o'clock, the store really settled down. Jason had never seen it so busy. All the checkout lanes stayed open till 8:30 when they sent him on his last break. And when Courtney left at 9, he finally started his nightly duties. The store remained pretty quiet, and he wasn't called up to bag at all. After cleaning up the bathrooms and the break room, he threw 10 boxes of plastic bags into a cart, knowing they'd all go up. Bob came out of the produce back room, wiping his hands on his apron, his hair disheveled a bit. "Busy night, huh?" he asked, shutting off the prep room's lights. "Good Lord," Jason muttered as he topped off the last box of bags. They walked out together into the produce aisle, and Jason saw a young mom pushing a cart down aisle 2, a baby in the child seat. Then he watched Bob flip off the rack lights over the product. He never even knew there were separate lights in the produce cases. "Why are you turning all those off?" he asked. "Well, we're not opening till Friday. It's standard." Jason stopped and looked around, noticing that the whole potato section was covered by large green garbage bags. He asked Bob why. "Keeps them from turning green in the lights. Some of the store lights will be left on." Jason never even considered anything like that. He followed Bob up front, watched Bob clock out, wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving and shaking Jason's hand. "Have a good one," he said, and left. Jason made a few trips back for more bags, mostly paper ones. and watched the young mom slowly pace up and down the aisles, stopping here and there, considering this and that. But she looked lost. She pursed her lips, looked from the items in her cart to those on the shelves, as if trying to figure out if Green Giant canned beans were better than Del Monte. The baby slept peacefully, but she looked anxious. Jason figured she couldn't be much older than he was, maybe 22 or 3. She looked young, pretty, small, a faded and worn brown coat that had seen better days, long black hair tucked under a knit hat. She smiled at Jason as he walked past her, looking at the meat counter as if she wanted to ask him a question. 15 minutes later, a half hour till closing time, and she was still at the meat counter, looking over the frozen turkeys. "Can I ask you something?" she asked as Jason walked by. "Sure," he answered. Using her 2 tiny hands, she held up a good-sized turkey. "How long do you think this will take to cook?" Now, even though he'd never cooked anything as ambitious as a turkey, he knew it had to thaw first and that it depended on how big it was. He also knew that there were basic cooking instructions on the wrapping around the turkey she held up. "It's going to depend on how big it is," he said, figuring she'd know that. "But it's got to thaw. Do you think it'll be ready by noon tomorrow?" "To start cooking?" "To eat," she answered quietly. She doesn't have a clue, he thought, does she? He pressed his lips together, shaking his head. "I don't think so," he said. And then it got worse. Her shoulders slumped, the turkey still in her hands, but now her arms went limp, crushed up against her as she fell back against the case, and she cried. He didn't know what to do or say. She turned and hefted the turkey back into the case and wiped her nose with her arm, bawling now. He stepped closer to her, arms outstretched, but he didn't know if he should hug her or what. "I've totally messed this all up," she squeezed out between sobs, turning to face him, the baby still sleeping. My whole family is coming over for dinner at noon, and I just don't know what to do. I've never cooked anything in my life." And then she just let loose, sobbing and heaving, arms shaking. "My husband's in the Navy and just got deployed last week. His parents are driving up from Missouri tomorrow, and I've never met them, and my parents are flying in from California, and his brother's going to pick them up, and they've never met me either, and they're all expecting to eat at noon because... I don't know." She flung her arms up in defeat and leaned over the cart. Jason just stood there. Man, she was a wreck. "Maybe," he said, "maybe you could possibly have it ready for a later meal?" She shook her head. "I don't know. His parents got to leave early because they're driving up to Minnesota for their other son." She looked up at him. "You really think it'll take that long?" He nodded. "What about a fresh turkey?" "I heard the meat guy say they ran out of them at 4 this afternoon." "Shit," she mumbled. Shit. She sniffed real hard, looked back at the turkey in the case, took it out, and put it in her cart amongst the cans and boxes already loaded. "You know," she said, looking at all the stuff in the cart, they'll just... She looked up at Jason. "We'll just eat it when it's ready. If they can't stay, I don't know. I'll figure it out." She looked up at Jason, who felt just awful for her, and wondered how much time she'd had to actually prepare. If it was a last-minute thing, he felt even worse. "Thank you," she said, grabbing his arm just above the wrist. Her fingers were cold. "I'm sorry," was all he could come up with. "Nope, don't worry. I'll make it work." And with that, she headed for the dairy aisle. She was the last customer to check out before the doors got locked up. She wished Jason a happy Thanksgiving as he put the last bag in her cart. "Good luck," he said, watching her push the cart towards the doors. All right, and if I could bring Lisa Adamowicz Kless back up here. Lisa is the president of the Kenosha Writers Guild. And Lisa, what does someone need to do if they want to join the Kenosha Writers Guild?
Well, we are a free group. We don't charge any dues to belong to the group, and all of our meetings and special events are free. So basically, I just welcome everybody to come on down to a meeting and check it out. We meet the second and third Thursday of the month, and right now we're at Carthage College in the Hedberg Library.
And the second and third weeks, what happens in those second and third weeks?
So the second week meetings are usually sort of our special event meetings. So we'll have in-depth critique sessions. We have special guest speakers that come in or panel discussions. And again, all those are free and open to the public. And then the third Thursday meetings are sort of our main meetings where people can bring in work and read aloud to the group, get critique and some feedback. And sometimes we get off on, different writerly topics. So, and again, those are free and open to the public. So if you would want more information, we have a website. It's www.KenoshaWritersGuild.com. And then we also have a Facebook page, and we also have a Facebook page for the show, Speaking of Our Words.
Yes, we do. All right, Lisa, thank you very much. And thank you very much to all of our guests today. Richard Bell, Irene Bilak, Darleen Coleman, Marguerite McClelland, Walter Gascoigne, Jim Janus. If you have any questions or comments or wish to participate on this program, again, please visit KenoshaWritersGuild.com and come to one of our meetings and visit our Facebook page. And don't forget, yes, we do have a Facebook page for Speaking of Our Words, and please feel free to leave a comment on the Facebook page or on our YouTube page here. So thank you very much to Dave Cole and WGTD, Steve Brown, Nita Hunter, our engineer today, Troy McDonald, Lisa Adamowicz Kless, and the Kenosha Writers Guild. Thank you for listening. This is Chris DeGuire, and the world needs your stories. We will see you again.